Welcome to the Nufarm Academy virtual learning webinar about aphid control and the reduction of BYDV in autumn sown cereals. My name is Paul Cartwright and I'm an Agronomy Manager for Nufarm. Let's start by looking at the problems BYDV causes and why your crops may be at heightened risk of infection this year. Barley yellow dwarf virus, or BYDV, has the potential to affect all cereals and grasses, not just barley. As the name suggests, the disease causes patches of severely stunted plants, with both leaf and root growth compromised, normally with yellowing and sometimes reddening of the foliage. Less above-ground biomass means a less efficient canopy, which intercepts less sunlight to drive growth. Reduced root system development means reduced access to and less efficient uptake of nutrients and water from the soil. BYDV is most damaging when it infects young plants, which significantly impacts yield potential at best, and can result in plant loss in the worst-case scenarios. Susceptible species can be infected throughout their life cycle, although crops infected after growth stage 31 are likely to show discoloration more than stunting, with lower impacts on grain size and overall yield. BYDV is transmitted by aphids moving between susceptible species, carrying the virus with them. We have started to see the introduction of BYDV-resistant traits, but the vast majority of cultivars and varieties do not carry any genetic resistance yet, and control measures will continue to rely on reducing the spread of infection by controlling the aphid vectors. So why do we anticipate a significant risk to your crops this year? Weather permitting, a greater area of winter cereals are expected to be established this autumn, not just compared to last year, but with more growers looking to reduce their oilseed rape area or take a break from it altogether. There is increased interest in alternative crops to join wheat and barley in the rotation, for example winter oats. Our attention next turns to establishment, and with last year's difficult weather and ground conditions still fresh in the mind, the temptation is to begin drilling sooner rather than later, particularly on ground where difficult grass weeds are less of a concern. Grasses in field margins, weeds in field, and volunteer cereals growing in stubbles all provide a resting place for aphids that act as a source of infection for subsequent spread to emerging crops. Early establishment means that crops are likely to emerge when cereal aphids are still more active in warmer weather. In years gone by, seed treatments would have provided cover for the first 6 weeks of the crop's life, with possibly a follow-up foliar treatment required on the earliest crops to emerge, especially if the weather remains mild. In the absence of effective seed treatments, we anticipate nearly all autumn drilled cereals will require at least one foliar treatment, with the earlier sown crops quite likely to require a second application to protect until colder weather reduces aphid activity going into winter. Gotcha is an effective, durable and rain-fast insecticide for controlling cereal aphids to reduce the incidence and spread of BYDV in wheat and barley. Gotcha contains 25 grams per litre S-fenvalerate in an easy-to-use EC formulation. It is approved for use on wheat and barley with an application rate of 165 millilitres per hectare for the control of aphids to reduce the spread of BYDV. Gotcha is quickly rain-fast, which is helpful in a catchy season, and the S-fenvalerate molecule is inherently less susceptible to UV degradation than other active ingredients, making it an ideal choice for use in early autumn. Decisions on application timing should take into account both the T-sum calculation of 170 day degrees from crop emergence, as well as crop inspections to determine the presence or absence of aphids prior to spraying. A maximum of 2 applications of Gotcha may be applied to a cereal crop, with the latest permitted timing of the end of March in the year of harvest. So if a second application is required on higher BYDV risk crops this autumn, Gotcha may be applied again. Although aphid flights stop at temperatures below 11 degrees C, this mainly impacts on the primary spread of BYDV into the crop. It does not impact on the more significant secondary spread that is mainly attributed to wingless aphids, as their activity does not drop off significantly until temperatures reach down to 3 degrees C. It is important to note that all applications of Gotcha are subject to leaving an unsprayed buffer zone for the protection of non-target arthropod species of 5 metres to non-crop land. Aside from varietal resistance, perhaps the biggest factor to influence BYDV risk is drilling date. So let's look now at the implications this has on spray timing and the number of applications that may be required. There are no established treatment thresholds in terms of aphid numbers. Even low populations can cause economic damage, and we have to assume that if aphids are present, they will be carrying and transmitting BYDV. Instead, we use the T-sum calculation as a guide to when treatment may be required, together with crop inspections to confirm when aphids are present and active. To briefly explain, the T-sum units are day degrees, and the number tells us the accumulated daily air temperature above a baseline of 3 degrees C, which is relevant to how quickly the aphid population is expected to regenerate, as this is governed by temperature. The T-sum calculation begins from the date of crop emergence, and the daily average air temperature, minus 3 degrees C, is added to the tally. At the point the accumulated T-sum totals 170 day degrees, crops are deemed to be at an unacceptable risk of BYDV spread by wingless aphids. At this point, crops should be checked to verify the presence of aphids, and an application of Gotcha at 165 millilitres per hectare would be appropriate. The T-sum calculation is reset when an insecticide is sprayed, and the target once again becomes 170 day degrees before any follow-up application is necessary. Some guidelines suggest delaying the T-sum restarting by up to a week after an insecticide is applied, depending on the persistence of the product used. Of course, there are a number of variables that affect persistence, such as choice of active ingredient, the effective dose rate applied taking into account growth stage and target size, sprayer setup and operation, any other components if applied in a tank mix, as well as leaf wetness and weather conditions at and following application. If in doubt, restart the T-sum calculation from the time of applying the first insecticide and monitor crops closely from the point at which 170 day degrees has been accumulated again. Then be prepared to spray as soon as aphids are identified in crops. Cereals sown in September are naturally at higher BYDV risk, and the first T-sum point could be reached within a fortnight after emergence. An October drill crop may not reach the first T-sum threshold until November. If aphids are present in the crop at this stage, then an application of gotcha would be appropriate, and it may be that no further applications would be required before the winter. So to summarise, September sown crops are considered high risk for BYDV infection, and it is highly likely that more than one treatment would be required. Later drill crops will almost certainly require one insecticide treatment and should be monitored closely thereafter in case a second application is required. It is also worth noting that earlier drill crops, particularly those that emerge in September, may be at additional risk from gout fly. Incidental control of this pest is likely to be achieved if, when an application of gotcha is made for aphid control, gout fly eggs are present and treatment coincides with crop growth stage 11 to 12. Let's just remind ourselves which aphids cause an issue and how. For an aphid to spread BYDV, it first has to become infected, which could have occurred during feeding on other cereals or grass species. Any cereal aphid can transmit BYDV. Grain aphids are considered to be the main vectors in the north and Midlands of England, while bird cherry oat aphid accounts for the majority of transmission in the south. In Scotland, the bird cherry oat and applegrass aphids are typically more abundant than either grain or rose grain aphids, but it is worth remembering that all four species can occur across all regions, and even low numbers can give rise to significant BYDV spread if left untreated. Cereal aphids are still largely susceptible to pyrethroids, so this group of chemistry represents an economical control option. Some cases of knockdown resistance may impact performance, and application rates must be kept up. There is no excuse for anything below full rate, which for gotcha is 165 millilitres per hectare, with a maximum of 2 applications per crop. Monitoring performance is difficult without walking crops regularly in the days immediately following application, but there are not really any shortcuts. However, if you feel that an application has gone on well but seriously underperformed, then please don't make any further applications of pyrethroid chemistry to the crop. Select instead a product with a different mode of action. Here's a quick reminder of some of the characteristics that make gotcha the first choice product for BYDV control this autumn. The S-phenvalate molecule is inherently less susceptible to UV degradation than other pyrethroids, and so is less prone to breaking down prematurely through exposure to sunlight. Combine this trait with the formulation's ability to bind strongly to leaf wax, and you can see why gotcha is most persistent on the crops that you are trying to protect. The chart illustrates how gotcha performed against a range of other products in an experiment designed to simulate heavy rainfall shortly after application. Soon after the spray droplets had dried on leaves, heavy rainfall was simulated for a period of 2 hours before analysing the plants to determine how much of the original applied dose remained. As you can see, 30 to 35% of each of the other actives tested was retained, whereas more than 50% of the gotcha remained in or on the plant tissue for later uptake despite the deluge. So while we should always be aiming to apply crop protection products in good spraying conditions, we can say with confidence that a greater proportion of an applied dose of gotcha will be available for uptake by the target pests for longer after spraying, if only short windows open up in which to make applications. A final reminder that insecticides should not be used prophylactically. We encourage judicious use to protect crops in response to a defined problem, and only when pest thresholds are met or other monitoring systems suggest treatment is justified. Gotcha is subject to leaving buffer zones for both the protection of water and non-target arthropods and beneficial insects, and while no pyrethroid active ingredient may be considered completely safe to beneficials, it is reassuring to know that S-phenvalate, the active ingredient in gotcha, is considered to be of lower toxicity overall than other popular products in this class of chemistry. Thank you very much for watching this webinar on BYDV control with gotcha. Please look out for more virtual learning content from Nufarm.